Welcome to Gruber Motor Company. I'm Pete Gruber.
I'm Mark Schaffner. Good afternoon to the inaugural Tesla Roadster first generation podcast.
And our goal today is going to be to talk about Tesla Roadster issues and focus on that vehicle. We've been doing these podcasts since summer of last year, actually, but they've always been broad EV issues, a lot of Tesla, of course. And what we decided was the Tesla Roadster community really needs some love. So we decided to create one especially for you guys. And we're interested to see how many people join us. And we're here to entertain any questions you may have. As you ask them, they'll pop up on our screen. If you can tell us who you are, of course, where you're from, that's always interesting. And if you'd like to share your Roadster VIN number, that would be of value as well. So getting started here. The first news item that I have is, well, actually a description of what the intent of this podcast was. So for those of you that didn't get the alerts through social media, what we're going to be doing here is the ability to share concerns in these weekly live sessions, which will also include periodic guests that we're going to invite. And the type of people that we're going to think you'll be interested in having join us is the early design engineers to discuss drivetrain issues, current issues with software, supply chain challenges. There are some serious issues with parts these days, and we'd love to get some history and talk to some of the people that were involved. We've got a couple of questions popping up here. One of our regular visitors, Stephen Rose, may I join even if I don't have a Roadster? Absolutely, Stephen, you're more than welcome. He's from YouTube. TikTok, Duke Luke, Florida's in the house. And YouTube, Britch 2929 loves the glasses. So.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Good choice.
I'm thinking that might be B-Rich 2929 as well.
So the additional topics would be, and we'll cover some of those today, Roadster valuation issues. What's happening to Roadster values and what are our predictions? Census counts. How many Roadsters are left? How many are bricked? How many do we have VINs for? We'll talk about a cool census program on our website where you can actually get most of those questions answered by just going there. Threats to survival, existential threats to the Roadster, such as growing parts obsolescence, solutions to that, main battery pack issues, and the impact of Roadster service center consolidations. What I mean by that is you used to be able to take a Roadster to any service center in the world, and nowadays they are trimming and regionalizing, and we'll talk about the impact of that as well. So if any of you have Roadsters that are interested in posing some questions and would like us to go into certain directions, please feel free to send us those questions.
You know, and for those of you that, like Stephen Rose, who's joined us even though he doesn't have a Roadster, every once in a while we'll put out some tips and things that we've learned about the Roadsters. A lot of this may be common information for those of you who do have Roadsters and might not be quite as common for those of you who don't. You know, for example, it's 5 years ago that Roadster #1 was launched into space. When Elon Musk did that launch, he said it was only about a 50-50 chance. He really thought that 50% was the best chance that it would get up there, and was a little surprised himself that it actually launched and made its way out into space. That was 5 years ago on February 6th, if you can believe that.
You know, YouTube, Bradley Parley, correct, it's VIN 529. I think Elon realized the value of a founder's VIN #1 Roadster, so he kept that. But you know, the reason he sent it was no one was going to give him a $30 million satellite to test one of his Falcon Heavy rockets. So they knew they needed ballast. Well, so instead of getting cinders and anvils or cinder blocks, they decided, and it's probably the most brilliant marketing move in this century, to send a car in outer space, because everyone is still talking about the Roadster in space, the Tesla Roadster in space.
Absolutely. You know, if you want to even know where it's at, if you go to whereisroadster.com, they have a tracking website. Yeah. So you can find out, at least mathematically, where that Roadster is supposed to be and where Starman is supposed to be at. We have another question from TikTok on HotDaz22. He's asking how he can franchise the shop.
I just answered another one of those earlier this afternoon from Sweden. You know, the difficulty that we have is we have no bandwidth to train, to set up a franchise, or to scale. We are so busy taking care of Tesla Roadsters that there is no extra time at this point. Eventually that may change, but for now, we do not have a franchise program or any training program, official anyway, but we are working on videos, YouTube videos, tutorials, and we will start launching those within the next quarter or so. So anyone that is interested in getting into the EV repair business, especially Tesla, will be able to go through our lengthy video library and get some help like that.
By all means. And you know, we've had a few questions in the past as well about how do I get into EVs, how do I get into repairing them, things of that sort. And electrical engineering is kind of the way to do it. Make sure that you have some background in that, or can get some people to work with you who have an electrical engineering background as well.
I guess what Mark is saying, that education that you'll get from Universal Technical Institute or Mechanics International or whatever is not going to be relevant going into this disruption.
That's exactly right. There's an awful lot that you're going to need to learn that a basic mechanics school just isn't going to give you.
Mm-hmm. We have a YouTube question, Brad Parley, who's, by the way, one of our Roadster customers. Question is, does slow charging really help prolong the battery pack life? The easiest way to answer that is constant supercharging, which is a fast DC charge, does decline the battery pack. And what we've been recommending now for the last couple of years or so is to do a slow 120 volt charge, leaving the yellow charge cable plugged in your Roadster. It will decide when it needs a charge. We have a newsletter that we just generated a couple of weeks ago that talk about all these issues and the downsides of the other charging methods like storage charging, which we do not recommend. If you want to get more information on the best charging methods for your Roadster, go to our website to newsletters, and the latest one there is Tesla Roadster charging.
We know that heat kills batteries, and the high voltage and high amperage charging generates a lot of heat.
Mm-hmm. The other thing you want to do is keep an eye on your coolant level, because if it starts to get low and overheats the battery, it can cause some damage. We've had Roadsters that have come in that had burned up DC to DC converters because they were overheating, and also battery problems because of temperature extremes.
Mm-hmm.
Pete,
yes.
Real quick, I was going to pull up some images just so people can get an idea of the Roadsters on it from our gallery.
Mm-hmm.
Let me pull that up real quick for you.
Sure, let's do that.
I just picked this one. For people like Steve who don't have
Fusion red or radiant red? I can't tell from the coloration from where I'm sitting. Red's always nice. While you guys are looking at Roadster pictures, we've got a TikTok question from Hot Days 22. And extremely cold weather is also bad for lithium-ion cells. That's why they have thermal management. Mm-hmm. And you'll find that in extremely cold weather, your range goes away or goes down because it's actually warming and keeping the battery at a certain temperature. So one of the things I wanted to cover in this first Roadster podcast session is to clear up some of the myths regarding Tesla Roadsters. And one of them is a concern about the continued support for Tesla Roadsters. The best way I can answer that is take a look over the last 15 years now, how much Tesla has done for Tesla Roadsters. And let's start with, for example, spending millions of dollars to buy back Roadsters. And what were they buying them for? Well, they were buying them for parts. Now, granted, that really irritates the collectors who are attached to Roadsters, but the problem with Roadsters is there are many parts that are custom, that are no longer available, and are not cost effective to recreate. Things like body panels, for example. So the commitment that Tesla made to spending millions to buy back Roadsters, to fill inventory shelves with parts for Roadsters at the service centers and stuff that you can buy, says to me that there is a powerful commitment there. And it was during a time when Roadster valuation was creeping up and they continued to buy.
Yes.
I remember the initial Roadsters they bought were around $30,000. They were usually brick cars or something was wrong with them. Or sometimes customers decided, you know, I really want that Model 3 and I want to trade up, which is not uncommon in the car world to trade, you know, to trade up or trade down in that case. Sorry, I didn't mean to say that about Model 3s, did I? So the next thing that I want to talk about is Tesla has no obligation to continue to support the Roadster. It's 15 years, guys. We have been dealing in the critical or working in the critical power world now for 35 to 40 years. In that world, you have uninterruptible power systems and data centers, you have lighting inverters, and the technology as it improves eventually makes product obsolete. So what the manufacturers do is they maintain service and parts for about 5 to 7 years, and then they simply tell customers, you know, this product is end of life. You're not going to be able to continue your service contract as of this date, usually about a year out. And part support will stop, but here's your upgrade option. Get a new UPS, get a bigger UPS, get something that's more state-of-the-art. Tesla could be doing the same thing with a Tesla Roadster, but they're not. They are making the 3.0 battery packs or the replacement battery pack. And we've put numbers to this because we would love to be able to make them as well. We can't reach the price points necessary. I assure you that at $30,000, these things are being sold under cost. So that again is a powerful commitment by Tesla. Now granted, they're not creating a full production line, cranking out, you know, hundreds of these every month, but they have kept up with the demand to the point where most brick Roadsters now are able to get a battery pack to continue to drive. So again, kudos to Tesla for continuing to provide support for the Tesla Roadster. Now, the other parts, they outsource certain parts procurement. We're the beneficiary of some of that, and there are usually high minimum order quantities for certain parts. Two that ran through us, for example, is the Tesla Roadster condenser assembly that sits in the front of the car. You can't order 10 of those, and that's all that Tesla really needed. So they are willing to meet the high MOQs to buy parts like this to keep things on the shelf. The fan assemblies is another one. So again, a strong commitment to continuing to support Roadster. And then finally, releasing documentation. Over the last couple of years or so, Tesla has been releasing technical documentation, wiring diagrams, schematics, and user manuals, and not just for the Roadster. They've provided the toolbox subscription for companies that essentially compete with them, repairing the later platform cars. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm pretty impressed with Tesla's continued commitment to keep the cars alive, and you know, they deserve some credit for that. There's some pictures, by the way, if you guys want to throw those up. That fan assembly that has the metal plate on it, a lot of these Roadster parts are no longer in production, so they outsourced this fan assembly to us, and what we ended up doing was, it should say fan assembly with, there you go, all right. The fan is available, that's a Spall fan combination, but the metal plate was not. So they bought these plates from us, we actually bought the fans separately, and our production group assembled these and sold them to Tesla to recreate this part, basically. There's another picture that shows the number of fans that we sent out to them, and although the picture only shows one pallet full of fans, there were actually two.
You know, and while that picture is coming up, is it not right that you, when an auto manufacturer doesn't make a certain number of autos, and I'm sorry, I don't know what that number is right offhand, they're not obligated legally to support that automobile for the 20 years for parts that the larger auto manufacturers or even Tesla with their larger volume autos have to support.
Correct. And you know, we researched that when we did a video a couple of years ago. What is a auto manufacturer's obligation? It was nowhere near 20 years. It was like 7 years.
Oh, okay, okay.
And they're well beyond that. They're more than double that. It looks like we've got some questions coming in. YouTube, Scott Mitchell. How long do you think Tesla will be able to support the first generation Model S, 2012 through 2013? Well, there's an interesting thing that happens, Scott, in the auto world, and it has to do with the volume of vehicles. The problem that we have with Roadsters is with only 1,700 or so left, no one in the independent space like us in aftermarket is willing to make the upfront financial investments to continue to create parts. It's just not cost effective. We'll never see the return on investment. With the Model S, hundreds of thousands of them, there are going to be legions of aftermarket vendors that will jump in and provide parts if Tesla were to ever suspend any parts for that car. So there's no concern about the later platform cars. It's the low volume car like the Roadster that's really at risk.
Right, even the Generation 1 Model S, if I am thinking correctly, it's not a completely unique car. From the 2014 down up to 2016, there's a lot of similarities between the two, so there's going to be a lot of interchangeability of parts between them.
And the level of customization also plays into that. Like Intiva, for example, makes the window regulators, but they also make them for a host of other car manufacturers.
Right.
So those parts will be available. The parts that are in jeopardy are the esoteric parts, like that DC to DC converter in the Tesla Roadster ESS bag. They're never going to make that again. It's a trapezoidal shape. It's got cooling jackets. It's got potting inside where to repair it you have to do an archaeological dig, which, by the way, reinforces the fact it was never meant to be repaired. Those are the parts that are going to be a problem in the future.
Yes.
Now, we continue to repair them, but not every one of them can be repaired. A small percentage eventually falls off, and now we've got a problem.
Yes. Oakshade 104 on Instagram is asking us a question. Oakshade, welcome this afternoon. Glad to see that you're on, as I know and recognize you from our Gruber morning show. He said, one time you mentioned a computer language to learn. Was it Linux? The operating system that the Roadster is on is Linux, that's correct. And Perl, spelled P-E-R-L, is the programming language or the scripting language that is used by and large for the software that runs the Roadster.
YouTube, we've got a question from Morley XJam. Hello, my name is James Morley. I live in the south of France. I have Roadster 2.5 Roadster, VIN number 377. Welcome and thank you for alerting us.
We appreciate you taking the time in what is late evening in France to be a part of the podcast.
Brad Parley is asking, how's it going with the new Roadster shocks? We're that close to having product in-house. And we're still rebuilding shocks, of course, but we do have a vendor selected that is going to make a shock for the Roadster, specifically for the Roadster. And we're close.
Why don't you tell us a little bit more about those Roadster shocks? What is exactly the problem that we're having to solve in this case?
It gets back to limited production. Back in the day when Bilstein was making Roadster shocks, they satisfied the contract for however many Tesla was going to buy. Mm-hmm. And then because it went dormant, it was not an off-the-shelf product anymore. If it was a product that was able to be used in other cars, like the Lotuses and the Lotus Elise,
right,
that would be a completely different story. But that's what happens when you have parts that are low volume production. They eventually go into obscurity, and it's going to be difficult to get them remade by the original vendor.
Right, and if I remember right, I remember having a conversation with you about this, and we went back to them to see if they could re-up their manufacturing process for these shocks, and didn't they say they don't even have the equipment to make them anymore?
They don't have the specs anymore. They don't. Yeah, and some of the people that were on that project retired. And,
okay.
Yeah, it's quite common actually. We run into the same problem with the electronics.
Yeah, all too common.
I remember one conversation with Chroma about 3-4 years ago when I was trying to get the power electronics module rebuilt. And they said, well, we can do it. Problem is, though, it's going to be about $2 to $2.5 million to restart the production line, and it is proprietary, so we can't sell it to you because it belongs to Tesla. Now, we could have gotten around that if we had, as a procurement partner, bought them for us and Tesla, but nobody wants to spend $2.5 million to restart an assembly line for a product like that.
Yeah, I mean, then you end up with PEMs that are $100,000 a piece or something like that.
Right, and the cars are worth about that at this point.
Right.
So I guess we threw up some pictures up there of the parts that we end up recreating. Some of the parts that we recreate, we do with 3D printing. A perfect example of that is inside the power electronics module. There are two insulating blocks, one for the motor mount or for the motor connection, and one for the DC input. They're black ABS plastic. As the years go by, they become brittle as they age. They almost turn into Bakelite. Do you guys remember Bakelite? Maybe you're not, old enough. When you dropped something that was made with Bakelite, it would shatter. It would break. We're talking about the 50s and 60s in the last century. But anyway, they get brittle, they break, and the molds are long gone. There were a number of Tesla Roadster parts that just fell into oblivion. And, there are a number of speculations and reasons for that, but whatever the reality is, that the molds are no longer available. Now, we could have molds remade. We looked into that with the ESS pack sheet clamshells, but it's incredibly expensive. And again, the return on investment isn't there. So one of our gurus here internally started 3D printing those two parts. And we actually improved on the design. Instead of putting self-tapping screws into plastic, we actually put brass pen nuts inside the plastic during the 3D print process. The other thing we ended up doing was, the reason these were breaking on the motor block was there's a square nut that is loose in the plastic that captures all of that torquing that you have to do with like 0-aught cables. And you have to do that every year because a Tesla Roadster needs an annual PM. And you have to take the PEM out to do that. Well, eventually, these square nuts provide so much pressure on the plastic that it just breaks the plastic apart. So what we ended up doing was we 3D print the insulating portion, but we leave where those square nuts blank, and then we press pen nuts into the metal bus bars behind that plastic piece. So all of the torque pressure is going into the metal rather than into the plastic. So there are some improvements as we make these engineering changes. Instagram, Oakshade104 says, thank you for the answer.
And Chuck Longolis from Facebook tells us that this is all very interesting. Thanks for sharing. Welcome this afternoon, Chuck. You are also welcome. It's our privilege to be able to share this.
So we have Mark Webb Johnson from YouTube. First of all, I want to introduce Mark. There are some godfathers in the Roadster community that did an enormous amount of, or made an enormous amount of contributions, and Mark Webb Johnson is one of those. He is the godfather and the inventor, him and his team, of the OVMS system that replaced the 2G connection to your Roadster and now allows you to reconnect to the Roadster and get telemetry from the car. His question is, the ESS pack, the first generation, failing cells bring down the brick, then the car can't charge or drive. Is there any news on sheet level replacement availability and any way of addressing the matching CAC problem? The failing cell problem we find is usually an aberration, and after a repair, and we find the cell, neutralize it, and take it out of circuit. It's usually just one cell that's causing the problem, and the cars go back to driving for years after that repair. Now, we all know that these cars are 15 years old, some of them, and we're all waiting for the end of life for the first generation Roadster ESS battery packs, which has not quite occurred yet in the legacy packs from 2008 onward through 2011 or 2012. So the part of the question about are there sheets available? No, Tesla is not selling sheets. And it wouldn't work anyway because the cells that they're using now for the new 3.0 packs are not going to be backward compatible into the legacy Roadster battery packs. And any way of addressing the matching CAC problem, you know, we've been doing that by just manually trying to match sheets when we replace them. We don't have to replace that many sheets with the Roadsters that we repair because we've perfected that method of isolating the defective cell. And once we get rid of that, and if the car arrives in our service center within a reasonable time frame, we're talking about 3 to 6 months, we are able to isolate and remove that cell from circuit. So we don't do a lot of sheet replacements. So the CAC issue has not been a problem for us.
Rick Evans from YouTube asks if we will be making a video on how to change the coolant and the brake fluid, or is there a manual for that sort of thing?
I'm not aware of a Tesla Roadster manual that shows you how to do a coolant flush or a brake fluid flush. And by the way, those of you in the audience, this is collaborative. If any of you have information, please share it and we will disseminate it as you share it with us. But the other part of the answer is yes, we will be doing tutorials for all of those things.
By all means. YouTube, Gary Hoffman. Thumbs up, good casting, gentlemen. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Gary. So I have an image I want to throw up there to dispel yet another Tesla myth, and it's the service center email. It's easy to become pessimistic about Tesla and the Roadster. But one of the myths is that Tesla doesn't care about the Roadster. They don't care about the Roadster customers. So I want to show you an email that we just received yesterday with the local Tesla service center here in Tempe.
I'm assuming this is it?
That's it, yes. And anyway, what we're doing here is we've got a collaborative effort that is going on with the Tesla service centers. And we send them cars at times. So what the service manager is saying, the best method of contact is to get hold of myself or Jack via email. But then he says, we look forward to having another Tesla Roadster at our service center. So, you know, it's not all doom and gloom. They do like Tesla Roadsters. From here, we should probably go into the service center consolidation.
By all means.
And what that's all about. I had a customer a couple of months ago that said, you know, I used to drive 15 miles to my service center, and now I've got to drive 230 miles, and I don't like it. What Tesla is doing, because the skill level for Roadsters continues to decline at the service center level, is they're regionalizing and making sure that the service centers that have Tesla Roadster skills are the ones that are accepting Tesla Roadsters. And that may not be 15 miles from your house. The other part of that is, why would you want to take your Roadster to a service center that doesn't have the skills? Tesla has also been flying people around, Roadster experts, to various service centers as needed. So again, the support continues, and the regionalizing effort is an attempt to make sure that when your car gets there, there are going to be knowledgeable people that are there to repair that car. What I predict is that eventually Tesla is going to outsource Roadster service business. And it seems like a natural progression. There may be things that continue to be serviced at the service center, but things like the work that we do, battery recovery and going inside the electronics and repairing down to component level or repairing the packs, is going to be done by companies like us, because they can't do this type of work at the service center level. They're not equipped, they don't have the skill level, they don't have the equipment, they don't have the electronics lab. So they already are to some degree outsourcing that kind of work and giving customers an option. So instead of just one option fits all, your pack is bad, it's a $30,000 replacement, at times they refer companies like us that are able to repair down to component level and fix that car for substantially less.
Now, I know that there's a number of things that when we hear them, we'll share them with yourself, with the community, and we hear from customers. The regionalization of these Tesla service centers is one of those types of things. It's customers that have told us, hey, I can't take my Roadster to Scottsdale anymore, for example. Only the Tempe service center in the Metro Phoenix area is accepting Roadsters any longer. I've heard the same thing in Southern California, that there's been some regionalization going on. I think it makes a lot of sense because you're going to want to take your Roadster to the place where the experts are at.
And sometimes they're moving people along with those service center selections or that regionalization. So if there's a Roadster expert and that particular service center will no longer accept them, then they make an offer to that employee to relocate to that other service center.
Yes, definitely.
YouTube, Mark Webb Johnson asks another question or says, thanks, great news that your experience with the individual cell fix is lasting for years. Oh, you're welcome, Mark. So getting back to team effort, we have a situation at a Tesla service center right now where there is a battery pack question as to whether it needs to be replaced or whether it can be repaired. Tesla cannot send or provide log file information from a customer's car to an independent service organization like us without the customer's permission. So what we typically do is make sure that the customer gives them that permission, and now what we're able to do is make an assessment. Does that pack really need to have a $30,000 battery replacement, or is it eligible for our recovery method? And the only way to tell that is with a log file that tells us precisely what's going on underneath the hood, which bricks are complaining, and what the levels are, what the voltage levels are.
On YouTube, C. Stone makes a comment, would never have thought Bezos was running a Tesla podcast. Jeff, what are you doing? Now,
Well, thank you.
Now, Pete, you look completely different than Jeff Bezos because you have glasses on.
Okay, all right. Interesting.
Also on YouTube, Rick Evans is responding back to us again. Rick Evans says, I have number 1264, 3.0 Sport. I'm 250 miles east of Vancouver, BC in Canada. That's the closest service location. So I may want to do some minor items myself or locally, hence the question.
Okay. And you know, I would suggest start with our newsletters on our website. That's a great repository. Also, if you email us, we have tech tips that we provide to an email list. In fact, can we bring up some of those tech tips and I'll give you a sample of what those are.
Bring those up. I was also going to say, does Tesla Tap do any of that, or does he just do the other platforms?
He does other platforms, yeah. This is very Roadster specific for these tech tips. And what we do is, as we find engineering issues, technical issues, aging issues, we share them with not only Tesla, but with the community that has signed up for these tech tips. Now here's a low-tech tech tip, which is get rid of that locking lug nut on your Tesla Roadster, because not if, but when it breaks, you're going to be in a world of hurt because it's the most inopportune time. You're going to have a flat tire eventually, and they're going to try to take that wheel off, and your locking key is broken. And the way that they break is age or overzealous tire people that put impact wrenches on those and destroy that little locking or that key portion. So the best thing to do is retire them, buy a set of 20 lug nuts. We have them on our e-store. You can get them anywhere basically. They're, I think, 10 millimeter Torx, and replace them for a safe measure. If it's a collector car, put that key in the trunk somewhere in case somebody wants originality. But in the meantime, get yourself a new Torx tool, which we also sell, and those lug nuts. We also have, if we can keep that up a second, when it breaks, getting those keys is extremely difficult. Not impossible, but you're going to go through a serious search. We have a library of keys that are available to the Roadster community free of charge. Send us a picture of your broken one, and we will send you the replacement to use to get your wheel off. And yeah, there's a better blow-up picture of all the keys that we've collected. And if you want to donate your key to the community, and if it's one that we don't have, we would appreciate that as well. because we share those. Now there's another tech tip which is a bit more technical. And again, you can sign up for these tech tips by emailing us at ev@gruber.com and just tell us what VIN you have and that you'd like to sign up for the tech tip program. By the way, the tech tips, the first one we did was the IGBT insulating material. That was like 2014. We're the first ones that seem to have noticed that the insulators on the transistors are getting brittle, corroding, and crumbling, which is shorting transistors. You got 400 volts on the case of that transistor, that IGBT.
You wanted to show this one, the power service?
Yes, yep.
Okay.
So here's another tech tip. This one shows the fan connector and the type of the engineering change we make to that connector after we replace it to prevent pin regress. This is a part that's in the PIM on the CIC board that controls the cooling fan that's underneath the power electronics module. It is an undersized connector. It doesn't have sufficient amperage capacity, and it gets even worse. Every preventive maintenance that they do, or every annual, as those pins eventually get pushed into the connector further and further, and you have less metal-to-metal contact, and eventually it overheats and then it burns up the connector. In advanced cases, it burns the connector and also burns the board, which now we're in a world of hurt because that's a multi-layer board and it's not easy to repair the etches or traces on that once you have something that burns on it. So it's a good proactive measure to resolve. This is part of what we do during a PIM upgrade and rebuild, which, by the way, is about 50 components and engineering issues that we resolve in your power electronics module. The PIMs they have deferred maintenance. They have components that wear with age, whether you're using the car or not. Electrolytic capacitors are a prime example of that. They are going to deteriorate whether you're driving the car or not because they have basically a shelf life. If you're curious about the deferred maintenance in your power electronics module, again, go to our website to services and you'll see PIM upgrade and rebuild, and it will show you in great detail all of the things that we rebuild, replace, and resolve in that power electronics module. But that tech tip you see there gets shared with Tesla and with the Roadster community if you're on the subscription list.
I think it's worth mentioning again about Gruber Power Services too, to make sure that everyone understands clearly. We've been in the business for 35 years. An uninterruptible power supply has the same type of power electronics as the Tesla Roadster has. And so that's how we got into the Tesla Roadster business in the first place. One of our depot manager at the time came to us and basically said, look, what you're doing in the critical power space is exactly what happens over here in the hybrid car and the electric car space, just that the power goes to a set of wheels on a car and it goes to an office and a UPS. As soon as we realized that, we began doing the work on it, and a lot of these same issues that we're seeing and have seen for years now with Roadsters are issues that we were seeing when we would go and rebuild power modules for our UPSs.
In the critical power world, for example, where uptime is very important, we're talking about co-locations, large data centers, companies can zero downtime is preferred. They actually proactively change caps every 8 years. And we recommend the same thing is done with the Tesla Roadster or any of the Tesla vehicles. It's an interesting thing. The Tesla, the later platform Teslas also have capacitors in that circular inverter. They haven't gone bad yet, but
oh, I didn't know
yeah,
that.
In that Model S inverter, and it's a bank of capacitor times 3. Those will eventually fail, and we'll have the same upgrade, services that we'll provide for those.
Yes, we will.
So Jesse is pointing at the, all right, what do we, that is the newsletter section. And you can see the latest one is how to charge your Tesla Roadster, how to get your CAC value. And then it goes on and on. These are very informative, and they were created out of questions that came to us that we collected and found the most common frequently asked questions ended up being a newsletter.
Yeah, I just wanted to show that for the audience. So
and this is all Tesla Roadster specific.
Morley Jam on YouTube has a follow-up question for us. He asks, is there a way to control battery or PEM health with files from the USB slot?
Unfortunately, not. The battery you can see, yes, definitely. But with the PEM, there is nothing being fed into the log files that would give you any clue as to deterioration in contactors, capacitors, the insulating material. In the battery, though, that's a different story. But usually you will see performance changes with the battery in conjunction with being able to see it in the log file. The reason we get log files is it pinpoints us directly to and it isolates the sheet and even the brick that is having the problem and what kind of problem. To give you an example, if you have a resistive cell in one of the bricks, and there are 99 bricks in a Tesla ESS pack, the symptom is going to be declining range. Every time you charge the car, you're going to lose a few miles. Sometimes you lose 10 and 15 and 20 miles if it's an advanced case. There is nothing you can do other than get it to a shop like ours as quickly as possible, because if that voltage in that brick gets below 2 volts and it hovers there too long, now your 68 other cells that are not resistive in that brick are going to start to die, and now you need a sheet. So with the battery, yes, there are ways in the log file to give you an early indication something that may be going awry. But again, the other alert is going to be reduced mileage. And the reason it works that way, by the way, for safety reasons, the Tesla Roadster only allows a charge to the lowest brick level, because if you overcharge a lithium-ion cell, it will catch fire. We found that out the hard way in 2017 when we lost the building with 7 Roadsters. We were overcharging one of those 1,000-pound battery packs, and it happens fairly quickly. So Tesla goes to extra lengths to prevent any kind of overcharging of resistive cells or bricks that are not living up to a certain voltage level.
Now, I do know as well that when it comes to PEM repairs, if there's a question or an issue with the PEM, here in the United States, we like our people to send their cars to us. That's the best way. But there have been a few instances where PEMs have come to us from Europe. If I remember right, we've had Hungary and, what is it, Austria?
Japan, Austria, Germany, Belgium, France, yeah.
So it's...
And Asia as well.
Yeah, we've had Hong Kong and Asia.
Japan.
So people will package the PEM and send it to us. We have a couple of cars that we use as test mules. So when we do the rebuild on the PEM, we're able to test out the rebuild, make sure that everything is working properly before we send it back. And then we're able to send back a successfully rebuilt PEM to all areas of the world.
There are a couple of reasons that we don't like to separate the PEM from the cars. One of them is they're not easy to take out, and it requires a bit of skill. The second one is there's a potential for shipping damage, or the shipper loses it. Now you've got a car that's dead. And we like a system approach when we finish a PEM to do burn-in and a lengthy quality control to make sure that everything is functioning properly. And generally, during a PEM rebuild, there are many other deferred maintenance items in a Tesla Roadster that can be addressed at that time. So stateside, it's a much better program to have you ship us the car and let us do the whole job with the car.
By all means. And I know there have been at least a couple of cases where we've received cars from Europe. One came on a clipper ship, in fact, if I remember right. And that one, I think, is still over in the Tempe Service Center.
It's at the Tempe Service Center getting its 3.0 upgrade, and it was a car that had gone around the world over a decade ago, emission-free transportation. They put it in a museum in Munich for a year. The staff there kept it charged. And then they asked for an extension, a 6-month extension, and the owner said, okay, seems like a good idea, since they had hundreds of thousands of visitors that saw and loved this car, the Tesla Roadster. Well, the second team didn't charge it properly and it got bricked. So the owner decided to send it to us, and to keep with that emissions-free transportation method, he actually found a clipper ship that had an empty cargo from Hamburg, Germany to Miami, and it went down into the hold of this clipper ship. It got stuck outside of Cuba for 2 weeks because the winds weren't favorable.
That's correct.
This was truly an unmotorized, emission-free ship, and eventually ended up in Miami. Now, sad though, the trip from Miami to Phoenix was with a diesel truck. There was no Tesla Semi available at that point to do the final leg of that trip. So in order to get the car here, we ended up compromising that. But it will eventually have a 3.0 battery pack, and the owner of that car is going to continue to do emission-free round-the-world travels.
Mikey P. from TikTok asked us a question. First, good afternoon, Mikey, and welcome. Isn't it true when a Tesla catches on fire that it's impossible to put out?
Well, it's not impossible, but the first responders are getting much better training now on how to handle these fires. There was a fire 2 weeks ago here in Scottsdale. Channel 12 News called us up and said, we want to get an interview with you guys since you're Tesla experts. And I looked at the pictures of the car. It ran into a building, caught fire. It was a Model X, and I saw foam everywhere. Well, foam isn't what you put on these types of fires. It requires copious amounts of water because you have to cool down that battery. And it may take 24 hours of water to get it sufficiently cooled. So it can be put out, but it is very difficult, I guess, is the upshot.
It definitely is. If I remember right, lithium-ion fires are as much a chemical reaction that produces its own oxygen as anything else. And that's one of the things that makes it so difficult. I do remember after the 2017 fire talking to a technician who said, yeah, about the best thing you can do with a 1,000-pound battery if it catches fire is find a swimming pool.
Yeah, exactly.
Drop it in the swimming pool.
There's a legend that Tesla, during the early days of developing the ESS pack, the 1,000-pound cube that goes in a Roadster, suspended it over a swimming pool or a vat of water for safety. If anyone can corroborate that for us, we'd love to get the rest of that story. We have a question from TikTok. Peterbilt 1000RR. Is there any self-charging technology in the works, like using a small eco-friendly genset on board? Not to my knowledge, although it's reminiscent of the T0, which was developed in 1997. They made 3 of them. It was the EV sports car that started the EV revolution, inspired Martin Eberhard and Mark Tarpenning, and eventually Elon to start Tesla. It was towing a Honda generator behind the car because it only had 80 miles range. There were no charging stations back then, and when you ran out of juice, it was your only way to get home. The next follow-up to that is from TikTok, Gary Malik. He says, why did you guys get into this? Oh, wait a minute. No, there was another one, Mikey P. We'll get to you in a second, Gary. I believe the brakes recharge batteries on the Plaid.
Yes, and brake recharging or regenerative recharging definitely is a thing. That's with all electric vehicles pretty much. It helps to add to the efficiency. You probably have heard of the term one-pedal driving before. That simply refers to the regenerative braking that is putting battery charge back into the battery as the car slows down, and it acts as a secondary brake. Tesla Roadsters have that as well.
By the way, the T0 in 1997 was way ahead of its time. It had regen braking, not just regen braking, but variable regen braking. I remember driving that car, and if you went to the maximum regen, when you did one-pedal driving and you went off the accelerator, you were braking pretty hard and fast.
Isn't the T0 the one that ended up going up to Pikes Peak and having some issues up there? Can you tell us about that a little bit? That
was a good story too. I got that from the previous owner of this T0. They apparently wanted to do a Pikes Peak run. Now, okay, bear in mind, this is 1997 time frame, fairly early. They took this car to Laguna Seca also, by the way, and started embarrassing Lamborghinis and Ferraris because it had a 0 to 60 in 4 seconds. And that's what prompted Mark and eventually Elon to go see AC Propulsion to figure out what's this car all about, you know? But anyway, up to Pikes Peak, that's an achievement, right? It's kind of like Germany, Nürburgring, you know? So they drive this T0 all the way up the mountain, right, to a ranger station up on top. And they were pretty proud of themselves. I don't know if they broke any records and all that. And then they were ready to go back down the mountain. And it occurred to them suddenly, oh my God, we've got lead acid batteries in here, 28 of them, Optima 12-volt spiral wounds. We've got regen braking that we can't turn off. and we're going to boil those batteries on the way down because of all of the back feed of DC voltage into those batteries. So they actually spent 2.5 hours up on top of the mountain there by the ranger station in a parking lot, driving that in a circular fashion to kill enough energy so that they could get back down the mountain.
That's funny. That is funny. TikTok, Gary Malik, he asks us, why did we get into this, and does Elon recognize us?
The short story is I bought a Tesla Roadster in 2014 after owning a Prius, which wasn't very exciting, but that Roadster was. And for a year I drove it without realizing that we've been in the Tesla repair business all along because our critical power work is identical to the tech that's in that Roadster. So that's what got us into this. We hired a guy. Within 2 months or so, we had our first customer from the Bay Area. And instead of a $10,000 PEM replacement at the service center, we said, ship it to us, we'll fix it. We fixed it, rebuilt it for $2,300, and the word spread quickly. Hey, there's an alternative to Tesla for these kinds of electronic repairs. Now, the other part of the question is, does Elon recognize us? I've talked to Elon a few times, and yeah, he knows who we are. Tesla knows who we are, and we have a very good partnership with them. It's highly collaborative. They haven't stood up at the Investor Day meeting yet and said, you know, Gruber, that tiny little company, is a great partner of ours, but that will happen eventually, we think anyway. But yes, they do recognize us, and one of the reasons they do is we believe in pay it forward. Everything that we discover, that we tech tips, for example, we share with Tesla. We provide support to them whenever we can, and the end result is the customer gets a better level of service.
We provide census data to them as well.
Oh, the census data, we were going to get into that. All right. So if you go to our website, if you're curious, how many Roadsters are left? That question had been asked for years, and finally a couple of years ago we said, you know what, let's just put a census program out on our website. Let's let the owners feed information to the census program so we know where they are, how many are left, where the colors are, because everybody's always asking, how many lightning greens were they made? How many very orange? There's a search field on the census program, and if you want to see how many British Racing Green Roadsters there are, this will actually tell you because it sorts them by British Racing Green. It also tells you whether the car is running or not. And if you find inaccuracies, which there will be duplicates, we ask the community, help us make it accurate. This is your census program, and we update as soon as we get information from you. Now, the interesting thing about this is no one really knew how many Roadsters are left on the planet. According to the census program, we have 1,566 Roadsters with VINs recorded in this database. We have accounted for Roadsters without VINs 565. So we're over 2,000, just slightly over 2,000, which is pretty remarkable when only 2,400 were made.
Absolutely. Big Perm gives a response back to Gary Malik about the question regarding Elon recognizing us. And Big Perm is correct. Elon kind of has to. It says we're the biggest repair shop. I'm not sure I would say that we're the biggest repair shop, but we've made enough waves in the community that Elon definitely recognizes us. I know that you have spoken with Elon directly on a couple of occasions as well.
And you know, it's not just Elon. I mean, there are a number of upper management people that are very interested in continuing support, again, for the Tesla Roadster. I know I'm beating that horse, but the commitment is there, guys, and we're in contact with many of the Tesla people and the ones that have retired or gone on to other things as well. There's a thing that we find within Tesla, and even Lotus for that matter, there's a certain nostalgia regarding the Roadster. You know, Lotus very much feels like they are part of the EV revolution because of the initial work that they did with Tesla, proudly developing the Tesla Roadster. The majority of ex-Tesla people we talk to are very interested and concerned about keeping the Roadster alive because it was what they cut their teeth on. It's where they developed their skills. It was their baby, basically. I've heard that said a number of times, and they usually look at us and say, Gruber, you're doing God's work.
BRich2929 YouTube has a follow-up question for us again. He says, you guys at Gruber are doing a wonderful thing for the EV world on the Tesla side especially. Thank you for the compliment. His question is, do you or will you do this same kind of work on other manufacturers' EVs in the future?
You know, it's a fair question, and the way to answer that is we started with the other stuff because we didn't have enough business to keep us busy with Tesla Roadsters. So we worked on Chevy Volts, Priuses, the Ford Fusion. We worked on basically EVs. What we finally realized is in order to be very good at anything, you have to get laser focused. And that's why we ended up with the Tesla Roadster and then the later platform like the Model S. At this point, we don't have enough bandwidth to go into the other types of vehicles, although I predict that within the near future, there will be other manufacturers, OEMs, that will come to us because they need to outsource. Once their production lines kick into high gear, they're not going to be able to build their service delivery systems quickly enough, and they're going to need to outsource to keep their cars running and their customers happy.
By all means, especially some of the newer manufacturers that are not part of the traditional manufacturing. You know, Volvo or Audi or Ford, they're traditional automakers. They have a large service infrastructure already. People such as Electromechanica with their Solo or Rivian, they don't have quite the service infrastructure yet.
Lucid.
Lucid is the same way.
And they're following Elon's model. They're not going to go through dealerships. They're going to attempt to develop their own service network and sell direct.
By all means.
So we expect those companies to come to us eventually because where else are they going to go? They're not going to go to Paul's Auto Shop down the road because they have no idea how to work on an EV.
Yes. David Yunte on TikTok, I hope I pronounced your last name right, David, has a question that we may end up answering more completely tomorrow, but I'll mention it here today as well. Will Tesla share its superchargers with its competition? And if so, will they need a booking system?
You know, what we have been predicting ever since Tesla began building chargers is that this is a terrific way to monetize their infrastructure. And the simple question is, why not share it? Especially if you have enough capacity to allow other people to use it and you can generate revenue from it.
It has also been in the news in the last 2 weeks that there are a select number of charging systems in New York and California to start with that have the CCS charging adapter built into the charging stations, and people who have non-Tesla vehicles are willing to download the app and put in their card information so they can pay for charging, are able to use those chargers for their non-Tesla vehicles.
Gary Malik with TikTok asks, how do you feel about NIO interchanging batteries? Had issues with Tesla and service. Well, there's a great video with one of the influencers that we're familiar with. It is, help me here, guys.
Battery changing?
Yeah, remember the Norway battery swap? Kyle Connor, there you go. With he did a video in Norway of a actual NIO battery interchange taking place, and it was cumbersome, lengthy. It looked like an engineering nightmare, taking a 1,000-pound battery pack with hydraulics and moving it around. It was outside. It was wintertime there. You know, this is Norway. And right next to it were some charging stations, and it occurred to me, why didn't they simply take that 20 minutes and charge there instead of the 10 minutes with this battery swap thing? I don't know if it's going to be a viable technology going forward because charging is getting faster, better, and eventually the whole notion of plugging something in to get it charged is going to go away once inductive coupling takes over, and or like Aptera, solar on top of your car that actually charges it with much higher density photovoltaics that can give you a better charge. The technology is improving exponentially, so I think that whole concept will eventually go the way of the 8-track.
Real quick, guys, we are at 1 hour.
Okay.
Well, it sounds like we've just got a couple more questions and comments from Gary then, and then we'll get ready to wrap this up. Gary does ask us if we know Rich Rebuilds.
Yeah, we know Rich Benoit. He knows us. Rich You know, I like his videos. He is the P.T. Barnum of the EV industry. There is no
That's a
doubt
good
about
way
it.
to
He is
describe
very
it.
gifted. He is a phenomenal promoter. And what he did with Dolores, that flood-damaged Model S, was an inspiration. We never got that far. I mean, he's willing to tackle a car that's got mold growing on the headrests with water damage. But my hat's off to him. He's done a great job of building his business, his reputation, and has some very talented people working for him.
Yes, and Gary does also say that Roadster set the bar, and I couldn't agree more with Gary on that one. You know, the Tesla Roadster proves something, and to me, it probably helped start the EV revolution. Before the Roadster, there were electric vehicles. They were almost novelty. You think of the Chevy EV1, for example. The Roadster was a great sports car that had an electric powertrain. Mm-hmm. It wasn't all about the electric and a substandard car. It was a fantastic car and still is today. That's why there are so many people that are so enthusiastic about it. And I think that the Roadster itself is what proved to the world that electric vehicles could be viable.
Mm-hmm. And it is a true sports car, a two-seater convertible. You know, Corvette coming out with this eventual EV with a four-door configuration, and God forbid, an SUV version later on. It's the wrong direction for a sports car. You know, you have a clear distinction between trucks, sedans, and sports cars, in my mind anyway.
Well, I'll never call a Mach-E a true Mustang.
Yeah, yeah. All right, Berm Spots from Instagram. Shout out to Mr. Gruber and the whole team. Well, thank you, Berm Spots. We appreciate it. You know, those of you that didn't get a chance to ask questions, we're going to be doing this every Wednesday at 4 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. And we look for your support and your participation, and we'll do our best to answer your questions. And I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did.
Absolutely.
We'll be back in the morning as well.
We'll be back in the morning. And in the morning, by the way, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 8:30 a.m., we have a broader EV podcast discussion. And this is where people come in with different questions, with different platforms, and but heavy Tesla as well.
Yes, look forward to seeing everybody 8:30 a.m. Mountain Standard Time tomorrow. And thank you guys for participating in the inaugural podcast. You guys made it successful.
Thank you. We'll see you next week.